Over to you, Dawn.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our listening skills part 2. A couple of weeks ago, we were here for part 1 of our listening skills, and we had a very vibrant, interactive conversation about listening. Some of us were just listening, while others were interacting, and we're hoping that this evening, those of you who had the opportunity to listen, you're coming back with some real pretty provocative questions or ideas, so we can all kind of dig in and talk a little bit more about this very important skill of listening. So tonight we have our panelists again with us. Dr. Sasha Sutherland has joined the team this time. Pastor Henry is working in the background. David Andrew will be joining us shortly, and of course we have Mrs. Sherry Barrow here with us tonight. Here, I just saw David pop in, so he is here. So before we get started, we would like to just do a brief recap on the discussion from last week to kind of get everybody up to speed and to kind of get our minds back on track so we could focus on the new information that we're going to share with you tonight. So we're going to ask Mr. David Andrew to pop on in, show his face, and do a brief recap of the last session. David, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Neff, and good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you again and to sit on this esteemed panel to facilitate discourse on such an important topic. Now, my task is simply to review a little bit of what was done last week. We started talking about listening, and we emphasized in the very earlies that listening is not the same as hearing. I mean, hearing is a biological process. We make songs, the sound wave hits our ears, and we interpret it in some kind of way of sound. But listening goes further than that, in that it attempts to make sense of what is heard. And we said that there's something called active listening, which is a style of listening that allows for certain behaviors to elicit a better quality and a better flow of information being shared by the person who is speaking. And so when we get involved in that, we behave in a way, we do things that cause the speaker to share a better quality information, and the information flows with greater ease. And so some of those things we talked about. And then we talked about empathic listening, which we said was listening beyond just the words and the meaning, but to understand the feeling that goes behind, that goes with what the speaker was sharing. So you're listening not just for the words and the meaning, but what was that person feeling when they shared? And if you respond to that, we call that empathic listening. And we said that there were several behaviors that we perform normally that are counterproductive to listening. And we examined a number of those last week. We talked about things where we listen with a view to defend, and we listen with a view to respond, and we listen with a view to correct, and we listen with a view, and all of these common behaviors that we engage in regular interactions that are not helpful to the listening process. We talked about them. I think Sherry emphasized quite a few of those last week. We took the listening test, so many of you got an insight into where you are at in terms of your listening, and we emphasized 5 key active listening skills, which we said were going to help and be very helpful if you are going to master and become better at a listening skill. We talked about attending, and that referred to giving good focus to the individual, both with eyes and ears, observing nonverbals as well as verbals, and paying keen attention to the individual. And that was attending. We talked about acknowledging, which refers to hearing, listening, and trying to understand the person's experience. Not trying to get in and correct and say, well, it wasn't Tuesday, it was Thursday, it wasn't 4, it was 6. But you're just simply trying to get inside the person's world and understand it. And you acknowledge that by a number of things, nodding head, saying, you reframe and all of that. And then you talked about inviting, which is another skill, which is the common tendency we have is that once somebody pauses, we feel the need to jump in a conversation. Nothing's wrong with that. We invite them to further share. Tell me more. Open-ended questions. What do you mean by that? Instead of we just concluding. So we invite them to share more, to talk more. That's a skill too. So attending, acknowledging, inviting. Summarizing was the fourth skill we talked about, which is pretty important. It allows the speaker to clarify and reframe what they think they've heard and to sound it out on the listener, on the person speaking rather. And the speaker gets the chance to say, yes, that's what I'm saying. Or no, you didn't quite get it. And so you get to clarify the message. It's a very important skill, summarizing. So you say things like, do I understand you to be saying so-and-so? I gather you're saying this. Is that what you really mean? And you get that clarification. And finally, we said the skill of asking. And we said that you should ask questions only to fill the gaps in the story that the client shared or the person shared. So you don't go asking questions all the way through, but you're asking strategically to fill the gaps, the bits that were not clearly understood. And you ask only belatedly. You avoid asking as much as possible. You ask at the end, you ask least, and you ask last. And we talked about not asking the question why, because it's a question that comes with loaded, in some cases, blame and inability to explain exactly why you did this crazy thing. And why did you get pregnant? Why did you? And sometimes you really don't have the answers, and it creates and builds psychological walls. So we talked about that. And if we pay attention to some of those skills, we will become better listeners. I think some of those things were talked about last week. We had some wonderful questions. And this week, I'm sure you have another set of intriguing discourse that's going to see you get into groups and all of that to tear apart and dissect some of this information in some practical ways. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to summarize.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. I think you hit on every major point we discussed last week, and I think you've caught everybody up to speed. So now we can move forward. So to begin the session tonight, we are going to all watch a video that looks at 3 common listening mistakes. After we watch the video, I'll come back with some instructions.
Do things I'm not trained to do. It's making me really anxious. And anytime somebody challenges her, she practically bites their head off.
We're not seeing the video.
The whole office the other day.
Okay, that's not. Let me go back here. Okay. Stop share. I'm sharing.
Maybe
Just
if you
Started first.
yeah, pull up the video on your computer, start and
First.
press pause, and then share that.
And then share. Yeah. I think that was it. That was it in truth. Great. Okay. Stop. Minimize here. Okay. Here. So share screen. And this is it here. Share computer sound. Share. Okay, I think we got it now.
Do things I'm not trained to do. It's making me really anxious. And anytime somebody challenges her, she practically bites their head off. She shouted at Jill in front of the whole office the other day. She's given me all this responsibility, and
I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to go into work and you're going to speak to her.
No, I don't think that.
You're going to speak to her and you're going to say, Janet, I'm really not comfortable with what you're asking me to do.
John, that's not going to...
You've got to be straight with people, Claire. That's the thing. That's always the thing. Otherwise, well, you'll never know.
John!
What? So she just snapped at me. I was really surprised. Then again, we haven't been getting on great recently. I'm a bit worried we might be starting to drift apart. Hey, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's not all that. No, I mean it honestly. We used to get on so well. We just seem to argue all the time. Hey. Come on. You guys are great together. I've seen you. You're so great. That's different. That's in front of other people. Let's go for a drink or something. I'll cheer you up. Dan, I don't want to go for a drink. Right. I mean, I was just trying to cheer him up and be a little bit positive, and then all of a sudden he blows up. Sometimes I wonder if he even likes me.
Yeah, well, actually, this reminds me of the time I was hanging out with my friend Shelley, and I lent her a quid for the fruit machine, and she said she'd given it back, but she didn't.
Right. Well, I mean, with this, it's...
That really annoyed me, actually. I mean, when did she think she'd given it back to me? It's not the kind of thing I'd forget, is it?
Well, I don't know. So...
I don't hang out with her anymore. I mean, when someone shows me their true colours, that's it. I mean, no regret. One thing you can say about me is I tell it like it is. I'm honest.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. So we watched the video. I hope you were paying attention. But I will give you some instructions and then we will go back to the video and I want you to watch with a more critical eye. When we break out into breakout rooms, we have 3 rooms and each room is facilitated by one of our panelists. David has room number 1. Dr. Sutherland has room number 2 and Sherry has room number 3. They will be your facilitators. So as you watch the video again, pay attention to the specific segments because when you get into your rooms, your discussion will be on the segment identified by the room that you are invited to attend. So let's go again. We'll watch it one more time. I hope, Pastor Henry, that gives you enough time to set it back up.
I think so.
We'll watch it one more time and then pay attention to the room you're assigned to because that's a segment that you will be discussing tonight. Ready? Okay.
Do things I'm not trained to do. It's making me really anxious. And anytime somebody challenges her, she practically bites their head off. She shouted at Jill in front of the whole office the other day. She's given me all this responsibility and
I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to go into work and you're going to speak to her.
No, I don't think that.
You're going to speak to her and you're going to say, Janet, I'm really not comfortable with what you're asking me to do.
John, that's not going to...
You've got to be straight with people, Claire. That's the thing. That's always the thing. Otherwise, well, you'll never know.
John!
What? So she just snapped at me. I was really surprised. Then again, we haven't been getting on great recently. A bit while we might be starting to drift apart. Hey, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's not all that. No, I mean it honestly. We used to get on so well. And just seem to argue all the time. Hey. Come on. You guys are great together. I've seen you. You're so great. That's different. That's in front of other people. Let's go for a drink or something. I'll cheer you up. Dan, I don't want to go for a drink. All right. I mean, I was just trying to cheer him up and be a little bit positive, and then all of a sudden he blows up. Sometimes I wonder if he even likes me.
Yeah, well, actually, this reminds me of the time I was hanging out with my friend Shelley, and I lent her a quid for the fruit machine, and she said she'd given it back, but she didn't.
Right. Well, I mean, with this, it's...
That really annoyed me, actually. I mean, when did she think she'd given it back to me? It's not the kind of thing I'd forget, is it?
Well, I don't know. So...
I don't hang out with her anymore. I mean, when someone shows me their true colours, that's it. I mean, no regret. One thing you can say about me is I tell it like it is. I'm honest.
Okay. When you receive the prompt for your room, just go ahead and accept it, and we'll see you in a few minutes, in 7 minutes. Pastor Henry, did you see my text in the chat?
Hey, Pat,
Yes.
you were in Sherry's room.
I want to be able to pop into all
Wow,
three.
yeah, so I made you the co-host, so I'm not sure if I should just what I should do here.
Okay, I'll go there and then I can go through the others. That's
Probably,
fine.
yeah. Great.
We have two others who are not yet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They are signed, but they haven't joined. Okay, I think everybody's gone. See Maria, see George, let's see.
So I think he was trying to reassure, but he wasn't listening, and then he probably was doing it so lackadaisical that it did not have a real effect.
Great. I'm just
That's your segment.
So our group person is Pastor Griffith, and he's going to report on the discussions. We had quite robust and lively discussion in our group. Pastor Griffith.
Hi, good evening. The general idea was that the husband kept interrupting the wife, trying to offer suggestion, and we note particularly that he seems to be engaged, whether it was the television or the radio, and neither of them were actually facing one another. And she might have been, we didn't know whether she was watching something, but she seemed to be talking in space, perhaps. And we also realized that even while he was, his eyes was fixed or whatever he was looking at, he was not able to pay attention to her nonverbals. And we, of course, thought that that would have been an issue. We also thought that that was, in fact, a very common occurrence that happened. And we were trying to find out what were some of the probable causes. And at least one that was suggested was, we thought that coming home from a hectic day and perhaps the idea of multitasking. The question was asked, can we in fact really multitask, and whether the concept of multitasking has affected us. So we come home and we're trying to cook the food quickly, and one of our spouses is speaking to us, but we really cannot really face them or because of what is happening. We also thought that that even occurs in church, and not only on the level of the horizontal level between you and I, but also we in worship, and we're talking to God, and we never stop to listen. So that essentially is where we got in our discussion.
You're still muted, Dr. Nash. Thank you, Pastor Griffith.
Thank you so much. I have one question for you, though. The very first thing you said, well, part of the first thing you said was that the husband wasn't listening, and that he, instead of listening, he was suggesting what she should do. So my question to you, was he suggesting, or was he dictating or giving a solution?
I rather wouldn't use the word dictating. I think he was offering a solution.
Offering solutions, you said?
Yeah, I tell her what to do. I think he was telling her what to do. Okay.
I don't know what the rest of you think, but to me, he was telling her exactly what he thinks she should do. But instead of offering possible solutions, he said, "Now this is what you're going to do." And his nonverbals were very clear as to that's how he should do it. What do you think? David, what do you think?
Yes, I'll be happy to share my view. I was giving others the chance to chime in. But I think I would veer that the intent was to offer a solution, right? I don't think the motive meant to be dictatorial, but I think the effect is similar. Whether it's intended to say, this is what you're going to do, like in dictating it, or in offering a solution, as I think it was meant to be in this scenario, I think the intent and the damage is still the same, because at the end of the day, his wife is left unheard, feeling as if you haven't even listened to me well, you haven't even understood my story, you don't understand my pain well, but you are suggesting. What good is that? Or you are demanding that I do. Whichever one, it hurts just as much almost. And at the end of the day, she still remains unheard, not listened to, and a failed communicative exchange, if you ask me.
But if I may jump in here, I would have to review the film again. Of course, I said I was having a difficulty with the quality to me, and because I came on a little late, I was still not settled as yet. But I think in communication, we are so emotive. Like, for example, I am not certain like that I could say he was being a dictator. He was dictating. And I think that that represents the kind of emotion that we bring to our discussion, when I don't think that they are warranted.
And your point is well taken, but I want to throw something else in the mix, a little bit of kerosene on the fire, if you will. The husband said, that's the thing. That is always the thing. Now, when he said that, I thought, well, wait a minute. We're not just talking about this one incident. We're talking about a pattern. He said, that's the thing, but that is always the thing. Did you all hear that? Yeah,
we did. That's a really bad word to use.
So while I would accept the solution, and I'm sure that was his intention, But when she was not readily jumping at the solution, he said that is always the thing, you know. So, but I'm just trying to listen to not only the words, but the body language and the emotions between it. And I agree with you, Pastor Joseph, that because they were not facing each other, they really were not paying attention to each other's emotions. And that, of course, was a barrier, was poor communicating, poor listening. So that certainly was a very good point that was made as well. Any other comments? Since everyone did see that first segment, any others have comments about it?
Excuse me, Dr. Neff, there is something in the chat from Henry's. He said, I agree, he was telling her, I think he strongly believed that what he was saying was the real solution.
Mm-hmm.
He probably certainly did. Genuinely so, in his era.
He knew his wife. He knew his wife's personality, and that's why he came on that strong.
Yes, I agree. I really think so, because sometimes with couples, you find that your spouse have this problem, and you want them to get out of the problem because it affects them so much that you come across as if, you know what, if you do this, you know, it will solve the problem. Why don't you do this?
Yeah,
and sometimes we become dictatorial like that, and it comes off wrong, and it is all generally always taken wrongly also. Yes. So definitely some miscommunication with the intent does not match the communication.
Right, right. Very well said. Very well said. I agree totally. Any last comments on the first one before we move on to segment number 2, Dr. Sutherland's segment? Dr. Facilitator, you look like you leaned forward a little bit. Were you about to say something? Okay.
No, I'm listening.
No, you were in this segment, so I'm surprised you didn't jump in there and say something, but that's all right.
No, we had sufficient representation. So
good, very good, very good, very good. Someone else, was it Zohara? Was it you were trying to say something?
No, from Winston's iPhone. Winston. This is Abigail. Good night.
Okay. Good night.
I think when I looked at that video, the husband looked like he wanted to try and speed up the conversation. It's almost like, you know, something I'm not accustomed with, and I have other things to do, and so let me just give her a solution one time so we can move on. It looked like that. Because that's what made me go on and on and on about a particular topic or issue. And I think he probably have been down that road before. So he's like, okay, I know this, I know what is coming next. Let me just give her a solution so I could watch football.
That's a very good point. Very observant of you. Thank you, Abigail, for that perspective. All right, let's move on to segment number 2, Dr. Sutherland.
Yes, Ronald is going to respond on behalf of our group.
Hi, good night, Brother Ronald here. With the scenario we dealt with, it seems like it was 2 friends, 2 buddies in a sort of casual setting, and you know, they were talking, but one obviously had a concern that he apparently thought that his friend would be the best person to have this discussion with.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, what basically happened is that his friend gave him a solution in that it was a scenario with him and his wife, and he sort of pacified the conversation in that, you know, well, you all are right, maybe you have been down that road already and everything would be all right. And he seemed to be more preoccupied in them going to have a drink. So what we concluded was that rather than the friend who was listening at first take the time to empathize on whatever scenario his friend was going through, obviously there was discomfort in it. He pacified the situation and just wanted to go do something else. So what we were looking at, our solution is that time should be taken, even though it doesn't seem as important a scenario to you personally. The mere fact that it affects your friend in that way, that sometimes people just need to be heard, and that time should be taken to at least hear what the other person has to say in order to give some sort of comfort in that you have someone who is here for you, someone who would listen, and even if I cannot give an advice, at least what you have to say is important enough for me to listen to. So this is basically what we had discussed.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Any other comments? Somebody has background noise. Can't find it. Any other comments?
Not a comment per se, but at the end of our discussion, there was a question about what if you think the friends shouldn't be together, and they, they're bringing this, he's bringing this discussion to you, this new scenario to you. Is that the opportune time to raise it, or do you just deal with the situation? So I'm just putting it out there as what came up in the discussions. I'm not going to answer it, but
right.
Even from that interaction, here we have someone looking at it and saying, well, what if I know the pattern with these two friends, and I don't even think they should be together because perhaps the relationship is not a healthy one. Is this the time to bring it up? Is this not the time? Am I just supposed to listen and deal with the matter at hand, or do I go deeper to some underlying issues?
Wow. That's some deep thought really went into that, and some reading behind the lines and behind the scenes and behind the script. But what I would say, I think you were right on, Brother Reynolds, when you said that time was needed. The person who was sharing his concerns needed his friend, who was supposed to be listening, to give him that time, to listen to him, to reassure him, which he was doing. He was reassuring him. But he got to the point where he had felt that he had reassured enough. Time to move on. Let's go have a drink. But he did not give his friend the benefit of time to help him de-escalate, or help him see that, okay, maybe I'm overthinking this. I think a little more time, a little more empathy to completely reassure him and allow him to really vent and get everything off his chest would have been helpful. But I think he was on the right path to reassuring him. He just did not take it far enough. And instead of just being silent and listening, because sometimes that's all they need is your presence, and you silently listening, actively listening. Instead of doing that, he proceeded to change the dynamics of well, let's just go have a drink. It's no longer relevant. Let's go have a drink. Well, that immediately affected the friendship, because it's like, wait a minute, I am really hurting here. I need some reassurance from my friend. Say something to me, or at least let me share with you my thoughts, my feelings, so that I can at least feel that I'm heard and that you understand my situation, and then it's okay. So I think you're right on with that, Brother Randall. Any other comments before we move on to segment number 3?
One comment, Dr. Nath. Okay, I was going to give David the lead way. David, now you're on the screen, I can say this. So could it be too that we don't select the correct friends to share certain information with? You're on the screen, David.
All right. Could it be that you don't select certain friends, the correct friends to share certain information with? Now, that could be a challenge, but even when you have the best of friends, these occurrences take place still. So I don't think we could conclude that that is a complete enough answer. But it is possible we make the mistake from time to time of selecting the inappropriate person to share information with. And I think that's most detrimental in terms of confidentiality and those kinds of things, more than it is with listening practice. Because among best of friends, these things still happen. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that would be my my response to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Totally agree.
Yeah. Doctor, if I wanted to add something.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah. I wanted to add a couple of things there because you talked, you know, a bit warmly about the friend and how he listened. But I think he failed to listen, really. He failed to feel the frustration that the guy was feeling. He trivialized, as Reynald was saying, he trivialized the guy's hurt and the guy's frustration, telling him what wasn't being said. The guy said, listen, I'm so concerned. She's been really, and he said, you guys are good together, man, this, that. Was that what was being said? Was that what was being heard? That wasn't what was being heard at all. I mean, he trivialized the guy's message. He would have done a lot better if he said something like, wow, I could tell this hurts you badly, boy. Can we take a drink over it? Let's talk about it over a drink. That would have changed the context of it, as if you're taking the drink while you further explore what he was feeling. But to just push it aside and say, nah, man, you guys are great together. Let's take a drink. Like what you're saying, then not really making sense. That's a real strong hit. It's a hard hit for the person who's trying to speak. And I think it does a real strong demerit against the communicative exchange. Just wanted to put that out.
No, that's a good point. Actually,
Yeah.
go ahead, Dr. Sadler.
No, I totally agree with what David was saying, and that's actually part of what I wanted to say. What came up in one of our in our conversation was that he actually did not help and he did not address the issue. But what I wanted to add is, you know, again, and David, feel free to respond, going back to the left brain and the right brain, or some people think in pink and some people think in blue. Here is a scenario where when you look at the friend saying, let's just go have a drink, you know, I'm trying to reassure him, like, y'all are fine, don't worry about it, let's move on. Where I look at it and I see that typically, you know, the old boys do something like that. You know, don't worry about it, man. Let's just go take a drink and be good. And this is worldview, old boys, right? Not your Christian mate. And so in doing what is stereotypically male, as David said, he hasn't addressed the issue. He hasn't tried to listen, or he's trying to listen, but he's proposing a solution as well, in trying to reassure. And he wasn't perhaps doing it in the best way possible. And so perhaps, as Sherry's here saying, he was insensitive. Yes, he was. And the better solution, as David said, would have been, let's take a drink and let's talk about it a little bit more. You know, let me hear it. If he still wants to do the reassurance, perhaps there was a different way of reassuring his friend. Even if, and this is an inference, perhaps he was just uncomfortable about hearing how concerned this friend was. But, you know, you can change the setting, as David said, and still allow that person the opportunity to voice their concerns. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Dr. Neff, yes, Sasha hits a really nice button when she talks about being uncomfortable, because probably among males, it's not usual that we feel very comfortable discussing emotions. And you don't want the scenario, most males will not want a scenario where another male becomes emotional around them. Yeah? And so you could just sense the trepidation that his friend was probably going to get into a zone where, boy, I'm putting on, he's thinking, well, what if he's going to start crying, boy? If he starts to cry here, would I be able to give him my shoulder? What would I be able to do? I mean, I'm just putting more than there is in the scenario. But I could see probably there could have been some degree of discomfort with his own ability to treat with emotions there. I wanted to add too, that sometimes we do this even with the best of intentions though. In Christian circles, for instance, when people lose loved ones, have you heard people say, don't cry, we know we've gone to a better place, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. I mean, I've heard those things in situations where it's gruesome. Woman lost her son on one of the streets, got bounced down by a car and died on the spot. And as the counselor for the area, I had to be there to call the mother to break the news on her and to have her come and identify the body. And senior policemen, some of them who was there, one who was a believer, when the mother comes and she sees her son there, she opens the white covering and she sees him and she breaks down and starts crying and she wants to hold him. And I'm right there with her. The policeman says, Don't worry, mommy. Don't worry, don't cry. God gives and he takes away. And he's a Christian. And I think he means that well.
Yeah.
But then I said to her, Mom, anytime you feel pain, just hold my hand and squeeze it hard. And I got some real good hard squeezes because I don't think I could tell her, don't cry in a time like that, but he meant well. And sometimes as Christians, we offer those solutions, or we try to get past things quickly enough.
Right.
In a view to offering solutions, and we need to be careful about that.
If I may come back in here, I am not necessarily asserting that this is exactly what happened in this scenario, but I'm making a general observation. The idea of to drink, doesn't that kind of strike something about truth about us, that we men tend to resort to drinks when we have issues? And could that not also reflect that tradition?
Pastor Griffith, might I interject here? For me, the drinking was used as a distraction. Like, come, let's go have a drink. Let's drink, and you know what drinking would usually do for you, man? Make you forget, make you go into this sweet mood. So he probably wanted to put him in a better place, not knowing how, because you could see that he was probably out of his own zone. And
Right.
David said something really good just now. Men are not that emotional. So he probably knew his friend was at the breaking point. And he, men aren't going to hug and, everything is going to be all right. So before that point, he probably said, you know what? It would be better if we go by the bar and have a drink. So probably that's what he chose. That was the safest thing for him to do. But sometimes, David, even in that instance, it's best just to keep quiet and say nothing. And once again, this is going to reinforce how important it is to listen.
Right.
Just be quiet and let the person talk. You may not have to do anything. You may just have to give a nod. You may have to say, I understand you. True, that is true. But you can give that kind of response and let the person talk to avoid what we would have just said, or what David would call the men in their emotion.
Is I like I said, I cannot deny what you say, Sherry, there, but that's why I said I cannot speak specifically to the case here, but I observe generally that if you do an investigation, I don't have the figures here, that we would agree that drinking seems to be. My father, for example, he's dead, and I knew when my father had something on his mind, he would just go and drink beer after beer after beer. Then he talks. So and I'm suggesting that this scenario brings this to the fore, and we should not dismiss that as a reality in the lives of some men. That's all I'm making here.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points. All well made and points well taken. This was incredible. There are so many aspects to this scenario that we can talk about. But let's go on to scenario number 3. Scenario number 3. Sherry, that's your group. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Abigail is going to speak for the group tonight.
Okay.
All righty. So we were in the group with Sherry, and the group participants were Rhonda, Esther, Zohara, Kimmy, and myself. And our topic that we dealt with in segment 3 and listening spoke about don't make it about yourself. That was one of the hints that we got there. And just to run through the scenario a little bit, we had this guy and this girl sitting on a bench, and the guy was, discussing some issues that he was having, and the girl began to bring up something that she had experienced similar, and the conversation was directed towards her, and she began to discuss her issue in detail, and she shifted the focus off of the guy who had the initial issue, who was trying to speak to her about it, and she began to make it about herself until she she even, you know, became a little angry remembering her situation and her body position, you know, her whole body language changed because he was sitting on the bench and she turned away from him and she began to vent herself, right? Mm-hmm. So some of the things that we discussed and we tried to dissect based on the scenario was one, that while listening, we should not be selfish and self-centered. Sometimes you may want to offload yourself, right? But there are dangers if somebody's discussing certain things with you. There are dangers that this could pose, right? And we discuss, you know, some of the dangers of wanting to, you know, vent when somebody's trying to share with you their issue. And we said this could cause the person to feel frustrated, become frustrated, bewildered. They may tend to zone off after a while because they say, well, you not on me right now. You just went off on your whole scene by yourself. And I'm here trying to get you to talk to you, but you on your whole scene, right? So we said that, you know, this could cause the person to feel, you know, not listened to. They may feel, you know, frustrated. Yeah. Also, the guy would have felt interrupted because he was in the process of explaining to you, you know, an issue, right? But you interrupted him by discussing your issues in attempting to identify, because you spoke about that. We said sometimes some people may attempt to identify with an issue, but may go all the way, of course, by going into their issue and not remaining focused on the person themselves. So we said body language is very important in the listening process. Maintaining eye contact, facing the person, it is very important. And if that is not done, it could cause a disconnect, right, in their communication. We also spoke about not trying to overpower the individual while we are listening, but to truly, you know, stay still and remain, you know, keep the body language and listen, just listen to them. So those were some of the issues that we had discussed. So thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Comments? Other comments from the team or from anyone else?
We're very quiet tonight.
I have a comment. This is Kenya. Good night. I feel the friend probably had good intentions. When someone's speaking to you, everyone wants to be understood. So when you say that you have a similar scenario, like, oh yes, I understand because I went through a similar thing, or I went through something similar, I believe she was trying to say like, oh, I understand because I went through something too. But then she overpowered it, as it was said, and, you know, she started to talk about her own situation. So it is good to be understood and to understand someone, but then not to overpower them with your own situation. And even if she said, oh, I understand, I went through this, such and such, but continue telling me your story. She could have brought it back to the guy himself.
Well, since you're a bit quiet, I suggest to you that what the other person probably did was, remember the lady who went on talking had a problem that was pressing, and what that person did was bring it back to the fore. Her problem was not already solved. So what do you expect you to do?
Pastor, I'll interject right here, but it was not about her. The person who really needed the assistance would have been the friend who came to her. So we have to look at the appropriateness of time and the matter that is at hand. Yes, the guy started to talk, and why Abigail spoke about eye contact. If you remember the video, she barely looked at him. She'll take short glances and she'll go off talking. So she had no way of actually looking to see, well, he was really defeated. His shoulders dropped. He was really, really defeated. So eye contact is so important in having a conversation, especially one that is so sensitive. Because if he had said at some point in time, you know, this thing have me that I'm going to commit suicide, she would not have heard, because she would have been so much into her situation that she would have missed that critical point where she could have offered him support. I was very disappointed in the young lady, Pastor.
My sister, you may honestly be correct. I remember several years at work, one of my bosses said, look, timing is important. And you've been saying that the whole tonight. He said, you may come to me and say, look, boss, I want 2 minutes to go out. I said, no. He said, but you might turn away and come back and say, boss, I want 2 minutes. And I might say, go. He said, yes, timing is important. And he said timing is important. But I repeat that sometimes I could be having a situation that I've really been carrying for a while and I have not overcome. And I back from doctor facilitator and he come telling me about a same experience that that really is raw, that's a raw part in me. And you are telling me that he triggered me? I don't talk.
Pastor, he could trigger you. However, we have to be very sensitive in situations of this nature because we do not know how affected the person is. So that's why we should more give the ear, because we kept our situation. Yes, it might have triggered. However, you could recognize that this person really needed the attention at the moment. So it is being selfless in such a situation. However, it is very important to note that when you come and you bring your situation, sometimes the situations, as we would have discussed last week, are so far from what we're going through. So you're coming to bring a sick, you know, you hear me telling you that I'm having an issue with my car or my husband, and you're going to tell me about the issue you had at work. And I am so deflated because, you know what? I recognize he's not listening to me. And my matter is really of deep concern. So sometimes we have to be, selflessness is a very important part in listening because you can miss so many important details. And the fact that she did not keep her eyes on him at any point in time. So she missed all the cues. She missed him turning away. She did not see anything that was going on with him for the last year.
That was excellent. That was an hand raised.
Can I just jump in?
That's a hand raised.
Okay. Good night, Brother Ranoli again. I presented the third scenario. I like the way that she pointed out, and it seems like, you know, they really went in detail because I saw that scenario and I did not gather as much information as they did. And what stood out to me is personalities. And the young lady who was listening to the guy or probably dominated the conversation had a strong personality. And I think even that is something to be mindful of, people with strong personalities in terms of giving a hearing or giving advice to someone who comes, that your personality should not overpower the scenario that is being presented. I like too the observation that she made in terms of body language, because in body language could say so much, and facing a person when you're being spoken to, because so much information could be given, perceived through the eyes, through facial reaction, body language, and I think all that was lost. And the importance of, you know, actually facing someone that you're having a conversation with is probably half of the conversation there. So much could be taken, whether the person is genuine in actually listening to what you're saying, or whether the person is genuine in the response that they're giving you. So well done.
Go ahead, Pastor Henry.
Yes, I think what was missing in that scenario is the fifth habit of Dr. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's the habit of communication. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think if that is borne in mind, we forget our problems. When someone is speaking to us, we seek first to understand, and whatever method we use, we make sure that we understand clearly what the person is saying before we seek to be understood. That's my contribution.
Excellent.
Dr.
Yes.
Oh,
I want to chime in because this is interesting. I'm listening to all of the discourses. But you know what? When I look at the scenario, one, I see 2 sick people, or not 2 sick, but 2 hurting people. Yeah. And earlier, I think it was Sherry who asked the question whether or not it is a question that you choose the right person to say things to, or the right friends. I think that was the question. And it's like somebody who is afraid of lightning running to somebody who is also afraid of lightning and telling them, I'm afraid of lightning, help me. You know, you're just not going to get any help. Right. And so it's a question where the choice was probably inappropriate. It could be that. And it's a call for all of us to be able to try to manage and resolve our own issues, because we will not be of much help. There's always going to be counter-transference. There's always going to be oversharing if our issues are still raw, if our issues are still unresolved. When somebody comes and they start crying over an issue because it's still fresh with us, we're going to cry too, and we won't even be able to help it. So all of the fine things that Sherry mentioned that are all correct, we just will not be in the place where we could really hold to them, right, because we are emotionally overwhelmed. We are in a place where that doesn't matter. I'm suicidal and I'm coming to you, you're suicidal too. You might as well just say, watch, let the 2 of us jump. You know, and it could be a worse off case. And so I think resolving your own issues, choosing the right person, there are 2 hurting people in this scenario, and that was just a bad combo.
And I want to go back to one point that Sherry made that was very poignant for me. You know, the gentleman is telling her about his situation with his friend in scenario 2, who he is trying to reassure. And she went off talking about something entirely different. So there's no empathy there. All it did was just remembered a situation that she had, and she just went off on a tangent. So she really, if you're trying to empathize with someone, it has to be on a similar situation. And as Sherry said, so I that happened to me before, but let me hear more about what you're saying. But she, like you said, she just went off on her own tangent. As David said, 2 sick people, none can help each other, and everything just blew up. Any other comments on this last scenario before we move forward?
Well, I wish David would stop reading my notes and presenting them as his own. Just kidding. No, I think what everybody said was absolutely on point. Yeah. And I just want to reinforce the position that that's why listening is actually a skill.
Yes.
And that's why we have to work at it. David, you laughing, you cracking up. I have here choosing the right friend, dealing with your own mess and being genuine. And, you said it all, but I'll just add that that's why listening is a skill. And to go to the nonverbal cues, sometimes as Caribbean people, the only time we are able to read nonverbal cues is when somebody's being rude to us or hostile. So, I went to this person and I presented the situation and she rolled her eyes and she rocked back in her chair and she did. But when you're supposed to watch those cues and check to see if you were doing the correct thing, you're not seeing that the person's shoulder is slouched, they look sad, they look confused, like you didn't understand what they were saying. So it was just, in terms of reading nonverbal cues, everybody made perfect points tonight. But as to remember that as Caribbean people, we tend to read the cues in the wrong scenario, but this is showing us we have to read it in all scenarios, especially when we're listening, we're trying to be that empathetic listener. And then the final point I wanted to make, Dr. Neff, is that all the scenarios are linked, even though we spoke about them in isolation. So I pose a question, had the first scenario gone correctly, had that the first guy, the husband, listened with empathy, do we think that the other scenarios may not have happened? At least linked to that scenario. So yeah. And the fact that each of them experienced in a different way what they actually dealt to the person they were supposed to be listening to.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question, and the answer is probably correct. Yes, it may have gone differently. At least the scriptwriter would have written it differently. But you're right. Their own shortcomings was not so short when they felt it. You know, when you're dealt the same hand, you see it differently than when you're dealing it out. So that's an excellent question. But Dr. Sutherland, while you're there, why don't you share with us some of the barriers to listening?
Yeah, so I made a few points, and I love the fact that, you know, Pastor Griffith alluded to some of the scenarios we actually experience as people in terms of men wanting to go and have a drink. And there are statistics, at least in the US, that talks about men using alcohol to pacify situations. I was trying to do a quick Google search to bring up some of them, but not quick enough. And David, when you spoke about that mother coming to see her dead son, so I just want to speak about maybe 2 or 3 cognitive or mental barriers that occur often when we try to listen and to lend a hand to our friends. And so the first one I have is selective attention, where you pay attention only to the message that benefits you. And a lot of us do it. You know, you're on the computer and your child comes and they're talking to you and they're like, mommy, mommy, and they go on a whole monologue and you're barely hearing them, but then you hear, and the coffee table broke, and you're like, what? So you hear what's important. For the students at university, it might be that you're on Twitter, not paying attention to the lecturer because that lecturer is boring, but then you hear, oh, well, you know, this is going to be useful on the exam, and all of a sudden you're paying attention. And we tend to do that when we're listening to whether it's a co-worker or a family member, you know, that family member that's always whining and something has happened, but it's not until you get that cue that you think, oh, wait, I need to sit up and listen. And then you say, can you repeat that again? And the person goes, wait, but you haven't been listening to me this entire time. And so it's like, well, what was the point of coming to you? So selective attention, it's one of those cognitive barriers as listeners that we need to pay attention to. Response preparation for all the married couples, for all the parents in the room. Somebody is saying something and it may not be something you like, or it might be something you totally agree with, and you're there in your mind like, yes, I'm going to speak to this point and this point and this point and this point. And so you are listening with the goal of responding instead of understanding what the person is trying to tell you. And so what that causes us to do is that we might miss vital information that might actually change our response. So we're so busy preparing our response to that scenario, that question, that comment, that, you know, had we listened attentively and empathetically, it might have actually altered our response, or we just might have had nothing to say. Then two popular ones, prejudgment and prejudice. They're slightly different, but I lump them together. And I'm also going to link them perhaps to narrow-mindedness and closed-mindedness. All four are relatively different. So prejudgment is where, again, we're dealing with this particular family member who's always whining, or let's make it real, somebody might be on drugs, so they want you to spot them $20 and you're just dismissive. And so the one time that they're not crying wolf, you haven't heard it because you already have this prejudgment that this person just wants money. They're not really here to tell me anything. I don't want to hear any more Nancy stories. Prejudice comes more as it relates to listening, your prejudice against the person because of their occupation, their dress, their race, their religion. And so you see that person, or you know the history of that person, and you have this mental block against what that person is about to tell you. So when I was looking at prejudice and prejudgment, and speaking about prejudice and narrow-mindedness, I came across Oscar Wilde's quote that listening is a very dangerous thing, because if one listens, one may be convinced. So when we talk about narrow-mindedness, prejudgment, and prejudice, we're trying to preserve our way of thinking. The white race is superior. All lives matter, not just Black lives. Why are they protesting, etc. Right? And we have these narratives that we buy into, or Black lives matter, and we're allowed to protest. You know, this injustice needs to change, etc. And that may be true, but the dangerous thing when we come with prejudice is that we're trying to preserve a particular way of thinking and not thinking through the entire scenario. So it's dangerous because we privilege a speaker, or we privilege a situation based on their identity. So we will only listen to persons who are speaking about Mr. Blake, or who's speaking about George Floyd. Or conversely, we will only listen to people who are speaking about police unions and the fact that all lives matter, or that if they would just go out and get a job, then none of this would happen. All of these are dangerous comments used to generalize a race, or, well, they're Hindu and they worship the cow, and we know that's not true. You know, we believe in God, and I know we would tend to link that with a particular type of believers, Jehovah's Witnesses, who they believe what they believe, and you can't convince them otherwise. But when we do that, when we prejudice others based on religion, race, class, age, appearance, etc., we don't open ourselves up to new ways of thinking, of new ways of dealing with a matter, new ways of encouraging others. So when people talk about the humanitarian stories behind Black Lives Matter, when you see Mormons holding up signs that say Black Lives Matter, that helps to change a narrative. Mormons don't go out, they stay in their community. That's the stereotype. So the fact that they're out there means that this narrative has touched them beyond Christianity or beyond race. And so prejudice is a very dangerous one, because we grow up learning those stereotypes, and it's difficult to unlearn what we've learned. And then I would just link prejudice and prejudgment to frame of reference, and I'm going to end there to give the others time. So when you talk about frame of reference, it's like you see things from your own perspective, the total knowledge of your experiences of your life, and you come across like that self-centered individual. So again, someone who's different and you meet them for the first time, you're kind of like, well, I come from a middle-class society where everybody drives Jaguars, and so I don't understand, the concept of even catching a bus until you actually meet that reality. And it's kind of difficult for you to take in, because everything that you bring to the conversation is from a particular frame of knowledge. Think about the sheltered child who goes into university, and they don't understand the different realities of the friends that they're meeting, the friend who might appear ghetto, or the friend who might appear poor, or the rich person who's driving into the university with a Jaguar, and they're coming from this particular frame of reference. Like, the world is peachy and everything is beautiful, but then they're shocked by realities that, murders or robberies happen on campus. So those are some of the cognitive barriers that I just want to touch on, that we need to be aware of. Even in our own lives, we bring our own prejudices, etc., to discourses, and so we need to recognize them in order to change the way we listen to others.
Thank you, Dr. Sutherland. And now Sherry will present some of the physical barriers to listening. Go ahead and mute. Please unmute.
Thank you. Sasha, I was listening to you, so now I want to continue and compliment you. Here are a few physical and other barriers that I'm sure you would have encountered. Noise. Noise can disturb both the listener and the speaker. Loud music, noisy surroundings, and the noise of machines, the noise of vehicles. All of those affect our listening. All types of noises and loud sounds can hinder effective listening. An example of this would be a malfunctioning microphone at a seminar or even at church. The first thing that screeching sound does is jump you. And then you have to compose yourself while trying to remember what was the last point the preacher made. Then we have hearing and speech impairments. Hearing is the first step of the listening process, and therefore hearing deficiencies may lead to poor listening. Similarly, speech disorders of any speaker may make speech incoherent to the listener. At times, the speaker's accent, though not a disability, may make it difficult for the listener to comprehend. Similarly, when a speaker speaks very rapidly, it may also result in an unclear message reaching the listener. Thirdly, the speaker's appearance or mannerism, and Sasha would have made reference to this. You may find the communicator attractive or very unattractive, and you may pay more attention to how you feel about the communicator and their physical appearance than what they are saying. Ladies, you are approached by an extremely handsome guy who asks for directions. You are spellbound. And when you catch yourself, you have not heard a single word they've said. Sometimes you just look like this. I'm sure you would have experienced that, or you would have seen it on television. The speaker may be a person who speaks and move their hands at the same time, exactly what I'm doing now. And this may be a distraction for many persons. Or perhaps you simply don't like the speaker. You may mentally argue with the speaker and be fast to criticize them, either verbally or in your head. This would surely distort the message the speaker is trying to convey. And finally, lag time. Most people speak at a rate of approximately 125 words per minute. As a listener, you are able to filter approximately 700 words a minute. If we can process so many more words than we actually hear, a mental lag can occur. Eventually, you'll stop listening, or you'll just find yourself drifting in and out. It might be to your benefit to mentally summarize the speaker's ideas from time to time to keep yourself engaged. Thus, listening well is just as important as speaking well. The two go hand in hand. Dr. Neff, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the chat. Pastor Griffith says, he questioned prejudice, and he said, when people are opposed to you, they acquire a high sensitivity to anything they hear, see, think about you, even being a dogmatic about what you mean. Believers do it too. So I guess as believers, we are not exempt from being prejudiced by the speaker, and whether or not it's in the areas that Sasha discussed or the areas that Sherry discussed, because we can definitely develop a prejudice against someone because of those physical characteristics that Sherry just described. Anyone else has any comments on those two beautifully presented sets of information about barriers to listening?
Just a question here. In terms of physical, I'm wondering if personal hygiene would play a role in, physical.
Absolutely.
Reynold, there's so many.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Reynold, there's so many physical barriers that if we stay here tonight, we'll never get off. But that is definitely one, and that's an embarrassing one, because you're not able, if you're an adult and you want to be not insulting, you have to stay there, because there's no polite way in telling me, Sherry, your breath is awful, or Sherry, your perspiration is a bit overpowering. And even in selecting the words, there's nothing you can tell a person in a situation like that in the best way. It will always come over to offend. So Ranald, you will have to stay there and smell my breath or take my bad odor.
Or take 2 steps back.
Sasha, that would offend.
It would offend,
It
yes.
will, but you haven't said anything. It's just a non-verbal cue for them to check themselves.
Pastor Henry had a good one about the mask. Pastor Henry, could you share that one when you were walking on the highway?
Yes.
The guy who, gee whiz. Which
You
one I
out
talk to
running?
you about?
You out walking and your mask
was on your forehead.
On my forehead, yes. And when I put it on, the guy remarked in a sort of a way, well, what, you know, what happened? Do I have COVID? Wait, putting on the mask. So I had to let him know I'm not putting on the mask because he has COVID, but I'm putting it on because I have the COVID. But he assumed that the mask was put on because, well, you know, I got close to him, I put on the mask because I thought that was the right thing to do. But he took it wrong. He took it wrongly. And some people do that.
Pastor Henry also put in the chat about stuttering. And I think a good example would be actually the Vice President, Joe Biden. He always speaks about this, that he had an issue and how he had to read books to practice with that. But that can be a situation which can be very uncomfortable for the person who has the speech impairment and the person who is listening as well.
Yes.
Yeah. I think Trevor or Bevan also, they accidentally put it privately, but they asked, how do you deal with someone who speaks very slow so that listening becomes a bit tedious? That's also another barrier to listening. And I mean, the decision is up to you whether you're going to stay there or not. Actually, there is someone I know who speaks very articulately, but very slowly. And so he pauses and he ensures that you have about 5 minutes for those first 3 words. And then he continues, right? And so what he says makes sense, but you have to make up your mind that if you're in a hurry, this is not the conversation you're going to have on that day. If you have some time, then you can sit down and engage. So I think to Bevan or Trevor, whoever posted that comment, as the listener, you have to determine whether or not you want to take the time to listen to that person because you know it's going to be tedious. And that's actually what we do when, you know, there is a prejudgment about persons who speak slowly or stammer. We claim to be in a hurry, so I can't talk to you right now. I'll check you next week, Sunday, after church, you know, or we address what is not controversial because it gives that person an opportunity to speak a bit more fluently. And so, you know, they're not so excited by what they want to say that it slows down. And then I also wanted to make a point on Sherry's speak just now. When we talk about physical barriers in the preparations, we were speaking about how we underestimate sometimes our own ability to listen to others when people need to hear it most. So we might be opposed to listening to someone because they speak slowly or, you know, their views might differ to us. But we should give ourselves credit in situations where we actually rise to the occasion. And so my example is my daughter's brother has Down syndrome. And I remember when I was pregnant with her, that was one of the things I said, God, you know, I don't think my back is broad enough to carry a special needs child. So I pray for a happy, healthy, godly baby. And then I met Ashton. And he is like one of my favorite people in the world and it takes time to understand what he's saying. But what that showed me is that sometimes we underestimate our own capacity to listen with empathy, to, you know, just to listen to others who are different to us, to put aside our prejudgments, our prejudices when needed most. And so Ashton calls me Auntie Kayla Mum. And I just think it's the most heartwarming, you know, title I've ever gotten. And when Ashton comes over, he wants to see the dogs and he wants to sit and talk to me. And I actually make the time to sit and talk to this little boy who I can't understand half of what he's saying. and I look at Kayla as my interpreter, and we have conversations. So when we say that listening is a skill, it is, and you would be surprised at the context within which we say we're intolerant to some things, but you'd be surprised at the scenarios where we actually show tolerance for others who are different or who have special needs, etc. So there's, while we spoke about the negatives, there are positives when we talk about this skill of listening.
And I want to share, I'm going to put something a word in the chat. It's called dysnomia. Dysnomia is a condition where an individual who is speaking finds it very difficult to find the word that they're looking for. And I know we've all experienced this. You may be having a conversation and you can't think of this one word, and you may ask, what is it I'm trying to say? And it'll come to you eventually and really quickly. But dysnomia is, the person who has dysnomia is a person who hundreds of times, maybe even thousands of times per day, cannot find the word that they're looking for to complete the sentence or to complete the conversation. So for example, you may encounter a person who might say, well, I went down the road the other day and I saw this man, you know the one, he's tall and he has a beard and he drives a red truck, and whenever you see him, he's singing a song, and the last time we saw him, he was doing this, and the person is giving you all kinds of description of this person while their mind is trying to find the word, find the person's name. So they're trying to say Greg, but Greg would not come. But they're describing everything else about that person that would hopefully help you understand who they're talking about. And oftentimes we encounter persons like this, and they're giving us, we consider that they're taking us on a trip around the roses. They're taking us on the scenic route in order to tell us a simple thing. But what is happening is that their brain is not finding the information that they stored in their old computer of a brain, but it was not stored in the correct place. So they're trying to find it. It's like going through your file cabinet looking for a document and realizing that you filed it in the wrong place. So while they're doing all of that, they're going through the files, and when they find the word Greg, then he says, oh yeah, Greg. So sometimes it's difficult to listen to someone like that because we are thinking that, hey, you're wasting my time. Why are you, just tell me what it is. But they can't, because that is a learning disability that they have. And we all have a little bit of that, right? Because nobody's perfect. We all have a little bit of that. And I would even dare say that as we get older, it becomes more difficult for us to remember certain things because we file them in the wrong places. So here again is another physical barrier to listening that maybe we may perceive it as a difficult challenge to listen to this person, but really we just need to be patient and give them the time to get to their point because it's difficult at that point in time.
Dr. Nath, I just
Yes.
wanted to respond to the person who had asked the question in the chat.
Yes.
Sasha would have alluded to their name. Reynolds? Sasha?
Pardon? Say that again.
Asked about what they can do about the person who speaks slowly.
Right.
I had a response for them.
Right.
It's maybe to their benefit to mentally summarize the speaker's ideas from time to time to keep themselves engaged. I had said that before, but probably I had a barrier. I placed my barrier in speaking too quickly.
I just wanted to get in on the listening being a learned skill. I have this friend, very bright. He boasts of how bright he is. He reads a lot, reads a lot of philosophical books and stuff. And the problem I have with him, I visit him, fairly often because I like having conversations with him, though I don't get time, I don't get the opportunity to converse because he has so much to say, because he's well learned. Sometimes in visiting him, I feel like I've just been to a lecture. And whenever I try to start a conversation, he would jump in and just take over the conversation. So even if I had a difficulty in listening, I have gone to the school of hard knocks there.
And you keep going back.
I keep going back because, you know, I would learn a lot from him. But, you know, just to converse, to ask a question or to contribute to the conversation, it's difficult even to get in a question or to get in a comment. You know, so
lecturing style. So
yeah, it's a lecture. He has a lot to say.
So it's like double Dutch. You're trying to jump in and you're just looking for that moment. You can, and sometimes you can't.
You just can't, right? And most of the time it would happen where if I say I'm going to spend an hour with him, at around 50 minutes into the visit, I would probably just have to cut the visit short and say, you know, well, I need to leave now. And even when it's time to leave, it's difficult to get in a sentence to say, you know, well, my time has expired, you know, I'm gonna leave now. Mm-hmm. It's that bad.
Good night. I have one last question.
Yes.
Sometimes we spend a lot of time listening to others, you know. How do you go about relearning the skill of listening and communicating with your spouse? Because I think that's the one relationship where listening and communicating goes wrong the easiest.
Breaks down a lot.
Yeah, thank you. How do you go, you see? How do you go about relearning that, or start to get back to a point where you can properly communicate with each other after how many years of knowing the person, presuming you know what they want to say and all the quirks and everything else?
That's an excellent question. And I think that the last point you just made there is key. Because sometimes knowing how a person is or how they communicate is a clue to how you respond and how you communicate with them. Sometimes the listening sometimes you have to listen and then revisit the conversation at another time, depending on the dynamics of that situation. But I am going to pass this on to our spiritual leader to address, because he's the one that does all of the counseling. You may unmute.
Oh my goodness me, you pass a very hard one to me, Dr.
I know.
The thing is that the fact being together for a long time oftentimes create the problem, because you know the person and you take a lot of things for granted. And so you respond based on the information that you have computerized and stored over the years. And it just happens so because we are humans, no two situations are alike. And so the response for this situation would have worked last week or last month. But the response, because we choose to respond this week, it creates an offense. And so it throws things off, as it were. So I would think that we follow the book. We seek to understand what the person is trying to get to us. Listen with respect and try to be very honest in what you say, even though sometimes it may be offensive. You try to listen, and even at times when you get it wrong, be always quick to use those 2 words or 3 words and mean them. I am sorry. And I think that usually fixes it most of the times.
Okay, I'm going to ask David if he can come back in and give us either address this question as well or give us some closing remarks.
All right. Well, I think I'm very much in agreement with what Pastor Henry has said in light of his response, because I think you can't presume that it's going to be the same. I mean, when Pastor Henry was responding, I'm thinking, should we just say, well, I know what he's going to put on, I know what color undergarment they're going to put on because I know them. You know, we can't even assume that. We can't even assume that, well, I know they're going to eat this food again, because today might just be the day they think of something differently. And so every situation must be looked at in a similar light, because it might be a different time, a different preceding factor, it might be a different contributing factor, different stressor. And so we have to listen to it in that light with a view to understanding without interruption. And I would challenge us to listen, just listen. I think some weeks ago we had the activity of just listening to your spouse or your partner without interrupting, just to understand. Communicate that you understand without saying a word. And I think that's a good place to start. And what you can do at the end of it, summarize and say, is this what you were saying? Just to be sure that you understand. I think that's a good place to start. Mm-hmm. And as you keep practicing that, that'll be helpful. Closing remarks, you say, I think it was a fantastic discussion. Lots of very insightful and interesting bits of information came up, from the barriers to the actual practices and to our own prejudices and the actual skills and the very insightful bits of discussion that we got from the groups. I thank all of you for your participation and for having me share in this wonderful platform with all of you. Thank you very much.
All right. Sherry?
I'm going to steal from Pastor Henry, so I hope he doesn't have any of the two of these. So something he said that is so perfect, and if we practice it, we can actually improve our listening. He said, seek first to understand before we seek to be understood. And Pastor, I'm going to walk away with that today. And then the other thing you said, and I wanted to link it together because the Henrys asked the question I was asking myself. I thought when you said the 3 words, you said, I am sorry. I thought you were going to say, I love you. And probably we can put the 2 together because they complement each other. So I need to tell my husband at times, I am sorry and I love you. And that will soften the blow. So I want to share that with everyone tonight. Just tell them I am sorry and I love you, and that will soften the blow.
Yeah, you see, Sherry. I spoke as a man. You're speaking as a woman. So I am telling you what I would like to hear, and you're telling me what you would like to hear. So yes.
So you wouldn't like me to tell you. Sorry, you wouldn't want me to say I am sorry and I love you, or you don't want to deal with the emotion?
No. The first part for me is what is important. Just say, so that's what I would say. I'm sorry. That's to us men. That is what I.
Okay, so to all men, you say what you need. You have to say the 2 things, and we know just to say we're sorry.
No, we would just say I love you. We wouldn't bother to say I'm sorry.
It's the order. It's the order in which you put it, right?
Yeah.
The more important thing first. Dr. Sutherland?
I concur with everything that was said. Like, there's nothing else to add. Fantastic discussion, everybody. The skill of listening, something we need to practice every day. And Sherry, I was going to end with that. Again, you and David need to stop looking at my notes. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. I think that just summarizes everything we discussed tonight.
And I just want to share something I found. So it's not original, it's not mine, but it's called The Traits of a Good Listener. And it's an acrostic of the word listen. Each letter of the word means something. L, look interested or get interested if you're not. The key is to get. I, involve yourself by responding, nodding, giving some responses. S, stay on target. Don't go off down the rabbit hole on some other point. Stay on target. T, test your understanding. Ask those questions. Am I understanding you correctly when you said this? Is this what you're saying? E, evaluate the message. Evaluate the message, not just for the words that were said, but the emotions as well. You have to take that into consideration. And N, neutralize your feelings. It's not about you. It's about the person who is speaking. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of listening. It is a skill. We have to keep practicing it and perfecting it and seeking to understand each other so we can be more skilled at listening, because I think our relationships, whether they are spousal relationships, parent-child relationships, even work relationships, all depend on us being able to listen effectively as we continue, because communication is what we do all day long. That's what we do, we communicate. Even when we are not saying anything, we are communicating. So we need to really work on strengthen that skill of listening so that we could be more effective and impactful in our relationships. Thank you all for being here tonight. And over to you, Pastor Henry. Any final words?
Yeah, well, thank you. Next 2 weeks, that is the first 8/15, we will be back, and we have a very important subject to discuss. We will be looking at shared values, shared family values, and we will be looking at the one called honesty. All right. So, and I'm certain that will have a lot of meaning, a lot of interaction, because I have some questions that I would like to ask. I don't think I'm on the panel. I'm not on the panel, but I have a lot of questions I want to ask about honesty. So plan to be with us. When you get the flyer, please invite a friend and get them into the discussion. And it was a pleasure having every one of you, and the Lord bless you. Do have a wonderful night.
Thank you, and same to you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.